Hi, everybody. I want to talk today kind of neurodiversity part three. Um, and this is going to be kind of a brief introduction into what a little of what Dr. Zate is like in her real life um, when she's not totally being your doctor. Also, please pardon the voice. I, like many people, have a child in daycare who decided to bring home the virus of the week. And for some reason, I seem to be the only person in the house who got it. And this is very uncool, but it means that, I may be sniffling. So pardon that. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about autism acceptance and what that term actually means. But before that, we need to talk a little bit about the social aspects of autism that can be super complicated. The things that make it very difficult for people with autism to communicate and to understand and receive communication appropriately. So there's a couple of quirks to the neurodiverse brain, to the autism brain, that people may not be aware of, but completely explain so many of the communication problems that can occur between the neurotypical person and the neurodiverse person. Okay, so first of all, people with autism lack something called cognitive empathy. They don't lack empathy, okay? Very empathetic people. If you explain to them what's going on in your life, they will feel bad for you. They'll understand how you feel. If you need help, they will have compassion and they will help you. People with autism are wonderfully, wonderfully empathetic. However, what they don't process well is the nonverbal parts of communication. Affective empathy is the ability to feel what other people are feeling based on their experiences and what you know about your own experiences. Cognitive empathy is the ability to recognize that without someone telling you it explicitly. It's recognizing facial expressions and what those mean in terms of the emotions of the person that you're looking at. It's the nonverbal communication, all of that body language stuff, all of those reading between the lines things that we rely on in human communication. The autistic brain does not process those normally. And so they're not reading your face. You can be having a really bad day and show it all over your face, but for someone with autism, that's not interpretable. And so you can imagine how that becomes a problem when so much of our communication is nonverbal. The second thing that happens to the autistic brain is something called hyperfocus. It's common in autism. It's really common in ADHD. And then kids with behavioral health problems will sometimes do this too, more as a way of processing what's going on for them. But what hyperfocus means is that your focus narrows into a very small area of your brain. You're thinking about one thing and one thing only. And when most people are hyper-focused, they do not receive signals from the outside world in reference to anything other than that tiny point of focus. This is when an autistic person is walking down the hall toward you and you're walking toward them, and it's like they don't even know you're there. No, really, they really don't know you're there because their focus has narrowed in somewhere else and they may not be picking up everything around them. This is really common in ADHD. They'll hyperfocus and then everything else in the world, time, people, disappears. They're not picking up the signal. They're not ignoring, they're not being rude, they're really not getting the signals. The third thing that affects autism socialization has nothing to do with socialization, except that it has to do with people. And that is that sensory sensitivity problem. Look, if you're around a bunch of people, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of color, there's a lot of noise. There's all of these different inputs coming in at once. And we've already talked about how the volume on those things for some people with autism is turned way up anyway. And then you stick them in a room full of people, and it is rapidly overwhelming. And if you have ever tried to socialize on no sleep and you haven't eaten and you're just done. And I think at a certain point, everybody's social skills fall apart when they're overwhelmed. For someone with autism, that happens frequently because the volume is turned up on sound and smells and movement, and they're at the same time really interested in what you're saying and trying to focus on you, but there's all this other stuff. It gets really difficult for people with autism to socialize because it's freaking exhausting. They want to do it. They love company, but sometimes the input gets to be too much and they got to shut down and reset. So knowing all of those things is wonderful. However, there is this word that we use, and it's called acceptance. Autism acceptance. And that's a fabulous concept. The problem is that most of the people who use that term have no idea what it means and don't practice it in any way. They think they do, but they don't. So here's how I break this down. Awareness means that you know something exists. Okay, I think we're all aware that autism exists. So awareness is not really our problem. Tolerance is, I acknowledge it exists. I may not totally get it, but I'm not going to be an ass about it either. Acceptance is a whole different ballgame. When you say autism acceptance, what that means is that it's not just, I am okay accommodating people with autism, kind of. It's not, I understand they're different. Okay, that's awareness, maybe tolerance. What autism acceptance means, what it will mean when our society truly accepts neurodiversity, is that people in our society need to accept people with autism, people with neurodiverse brains, as having an experience of life that's different than theirs and that is equally valid. Equally valid. This is not a disability. This is a different way of processing, and it is equally valid, as equally important, as equally meaningful as the neurotypical experience. But right now, American society lives in the neurotypical experience. All of our socialization, all of our etiquette, all of what we consider to be normal is based on the neurotypical experience. And this excludes a large chunk of our population from really feeling like they connect and like they're accepted. This is going to require people to accept the fact that other people do not process information the way that you do, and that the ways in which that impacts them may not be totally evident to the neurotypical person. It's going to require empathy and compassion on the part of both the neurodiverse population and the neurotypical population to understand where those two systems can collide, where misunderstandings can happen, and then to deal with them. And I know that there's people watching saying, I have that, I do that. Okay, so here's your test. Next time you're in Target and you see a little kid run away from a parent, and that dad goes like trucking after that kid calling his name, and the kid doesn't respond, what is the first thought in your head? Because for most people, it's, that kid is an awful kid, why can't those parents control their kid, right? How many people really thought, gosh, I wonder if that kid doesn't hear that dad. I wonder if that kid's hyper-focused on something else and really isn't registering what dad's saying. I wonder if that kid lacks the knowledge and impulse control to really stay with the parents when that's what's most appropriate. Is that what you would think? Or did you secretly think the other thing? The that kid sucks and those parents suck thing. When you see a kid melt down at the checkout line at Albertsons, do you get annoyed with the mom? Why can't she control him? That kid just wants something and he's not getting his way and so he's having a meltdown. Or do you look at that child and think, that kid's having a really hard time. This might have been a really overwhelming trip for him. That's really hard as a mom. Because, she's got to balance getting food for her family with keeping this kid stable, and he probably doesn't want to be laying on the ground screaming any more than you want him to be, and gosh, that's really hard. Is that really what you thought? Did you? Because I bet you didn't. I bet you didn't. When someone at work walks by you in the hallway and doesn't acknowledge your presence, do you get all butthurt and go talk to your friends about how rude that person is? Or do you consider for a moment the fact that they just weren't picking up that you were there because their brain wasn't processing on that level, because they were having tunnel vision? The person who sits alone in the corner at the party, they come, but they don't socialize like everybody else does. Do you stand there with your friends and look at them and think how weird that is and how antisocial they are? Or do you acknowledge the fact that for that person, simply showing up was a heroic effort and their way of telling you that they are interested in what you think is important and that they want to be there? See, the problem is that we have established this system of manners and etiquette and social expectation that is entirely based on the neurotypical experience. And what we've not done is acknowledge that there is a big chunk of the population who doesn't process like that. People who are neurodiverse, autism, high-functioning autism in general, they can be really blunt. They're going to tell you if your butt looks big in those jeans. I'm sorry, they are. Which is actually kind of a cool thing, because at least you don't go out like that, But it takes a certain amount of understanding and compassion to deal with that bluntness, to be able to not take everything personally, to be able to take feedback in the way that it's going to come out of the neurodiverse person, which may not be warm and fuzzy. And we've come to expect from other people that they're going to speak in a way that protects our feelings. That's not necessarily the neurodiverse person's strength. Now, many can do it, but doing it is a heroic effort to accommodate the neurotypical person. People with autism make enormous accommodations for neurotypical people to allow neurotypical people to feel good and not get their feelings hurt. Did you think about it that way? Honestly, the fact that a person with autism will exhaust themselves at a party to show the sort of acceptable signs of interest and politeness and sort of try to make it like a normal conversation between two neurotypical people, yeah, that's them accommodating you. What I'm saying is that at some point, we are going to have to accept the fact that what we consider right and good manners is neurotypical normal, but it's not neurodiverse normal. And that it is okay to be both ways. Both are equally good things. They work together really well. But when you tell me you accept autism, what that means to me as a provider and as a parent is that you understand that the manners, the way that the neurodiverse person interacts with you, it doesn't have to be in the neurotypical format. And if they don't do that in the neurotypical format, they're not a bad person, they're not a mean person, they're not a rude person. They're just a person. See, this would be a lot easier if we judged people instead of on the facade they put up, if we judged them on their contents, on the contents of their heart, on their sincerity, on their genuineness, if that's a word, I think it should be, on their authenticity. But we don't. We don't. If they don't play the social game, then we kind of roll our eyes and we think they're weird and we push them away. Meanwhile, people who play the social game can be kind of awful people, and yet they still manage to get ahead because they play the game. They play the neurotypical game. When you post that cute little ribbon with puzzle pieces on it, you know what I mean? It says, I accept autism. Before you put that on your Facebook page, I want you to look at your own behavior and look at your own assumptions about the behavior of others. Because, y'all, we notice, like we totally know. I see people mouthing off about terrible parenting and how people can't control their kids and blah, blah, blah. And then you post that little ribbony thing. And I think, do you really get the fact that some of those parents that you called awful parents are dealing with a kid who's like nothing you've ever experienced? Do you know that? Do you get it? Or is this just something nice we say? Yes, I accept autism, but I'm not going to go outside my comfort zone. I'm not going to change my perception of the way that people communicate and people should communicate in order to validate the existence of this whole other population of humans who contribute to this world. So neurodiversity is not a disability. It's a difference. And when we stop viewing human beings through the neurotypical lens, when we accept that socialization between people is entirely dependent on the way those people are wired, and that differences in social norms do not indicate bad qualities about the person, but they might tell you a little bit about how their brain is built. I say this as somebody who sits a little further on the neurodiverse line. Like I do kind of bounce back and forth between the two. Someone who has neurodiverse kids, and I just want parents of people with autism to understand that this is not your kid's fault. If you have autism, this is not your fault. This is a social construct that has been built by people who fundamentally do not understand you. And to the extent that you can come out, I mean, it's sort of like that for some really high-functioning neurodiverse people. Most people in their life don't know they're neurodiverse, but if you can come out and be open about that and demonstrate that these people contribute to the world, that autism is not a sentence, it's just the way your brain's built, it will make things a whole lot easier for everybody else who is struggling with being accepted for who and what they are. If you have questions, PM me or come see me or comment on this video. I wanted to make sure that I put out there the socialization issues of autism and the reason this is so hard. And I want everyone who's neurodiverse to know that you do have allies and you do have people in this world who understand where you're coming from and are willing to work with you on those things. And seek those people out because they are there. Support each other because right now that's kind of what you have. Like I said, I'm always here. I hope you guys have a really good weekend. I really hope I get over this cold soon because I am so over this. You can't even imagine. I'm like ready to sell this kid for bringing this home to me. And if there's something you want me to talk about specifically, please let me know. Otherwise, at some point we may end up shifting away from neurodiversity into some other topic. Maybe obesity. I don't know. I'd like to hear what y'all think though. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you guys later.